Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Osterhout, the executive producer here at Lincoln Square, and I'm joined by Andra Watkins of For Such a Time as This. Andra, how you doing today?
I am having some thunderstorms and crazy weather in the background. I'm great, but you might hear that in the background today, so I'm sorry if you do.
Perhaps it is God trying to keep us from exposing his
Well,
minions.
yeah, if lightning strikes me, that's definitely what the people we're talking about today would say.
For sure, 100%. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen, because if it did, you would have to be treated in a hospital for it. And
Yeah.
you like that segue?
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, this week we're talking about something called biblical medical ethics. And it's a thing that I had never heard about until I read your work this week. And on that note, everyone out there, if you're not subscribed to Andra's Substack For Such a Time as This, go subscribe now. We can wait, or you can pause and come back, or you can just subscribe after the show. That's probably even the better idea. But I want to start with this concept called biblical medical ethics, because it we've all heard stories and told stories, and we all had a friend who had a cousin whose parents wouldn't let them get treated for a particular illness or disease because they had a certain core belief system, and they thought God would treat them. And it always sounded like at least to us normies, right? A kind of like edge case or mythological story that none of us really knew about. But this week, you've really brought receipts on what this system is actually doing, and it has legs that extend to RFK Jr. and folks like Todd Blanche. The medical community is not what you think it is. So let's start with biblical medical ethics and then branch out from there. What is it?
Biblical medical ethics is taking the white Christian nationalist view of the body, healthcare, mental health care, and really, quite honestly, how society ought to be ordered and run and function, and applying it to healthcare decisions, how healthcare is administered, who gets healthcare and who doesn't. This particular group that I'm studying, they've written a manifesto. They published it in like 1987. This group came out of a conference in 1978 about the inerrancy of the Bible and what was happening with the horrible liberal takeover of our government back when the moral majority and things like that were forming. And so this group of white Christian nationalist doctors decided to define what biblical medical ethics would look like. I won't say that the Heritage Foundation used their manifesto to craft Project 2025 and Saving America by Saving the Family, which we've talked about on this program a bunch. But I will say that the tenets in this particular manifesto are commonplace across the white Christian nationalist sphere, whether we're talking about Catholic, extremist, white Christian nationalist, or Protestant or non-denominational. You certainly see this kind of thing with Christian Scientists, even more extremely, Jehovah's Witnesses, and that kind of thing. So what we're talking about, as batshit loony as it sounds, is commonplace Christian nationalist beliefs. So I want to say that right up front. When we talk about politicians like Ted Cruz, Mike Johnson, J.D. Vance, Marsha Blackburn, Steve Scalise, Josh Hawley, when we talk about Alliance Defending Freedom, when we talk about people like Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society, these are the biblical medical ethics that govern how they are approaching reshaping healthcare in this country. So this isn't a fringe group of crazy loony people. I want everybody to understand this is what is guiding every change they're making to healthcare in the United States right now. And that's great for private equity. It's great for their billionaire overlords because they can just make more money. So this is going to sound crazy, but please understand, lots of people in power subscribe to this stuff. And I want to say that right up front.
And as I was reading it, I was like, well, this is anti-enlightenment, it's anti-science, it's anti all of these things. And I don't know that they would disagree with that.
They don't. They are anti-enlightenment and anti-science. The Bible is the ultimate science book. I wrote that in 2024 when I was covering Project 2025 and saying they will cut the VA, they will cut the ACA, they will not allow drugs and things like that for mental health care because they believe mental health issues are caused by sinful choices and demon possession. So they're not going. So I was covering all of that and warning Americans not to vote for this. But I was a crazy, ridiculous, hysterical harpy, and here we are.
You're our crazy, hysterical harpy. I and we love you for it. But it's quotes like these: "We deny that perfect health is possible except for the state of believers in heaven." Right. So I want to talk about the sort of practical applications of this biblical medical ethics, right? Because it's not just like, well, you got to believe. It is actually trying to put belief and biblical belief in the practice of medicine.
Yes.
And so that, like you said, medical problems are very frequently caused by personal sins. And this, I want to get into some of the sort of bigger social issues that this kind of thinking causes shortly, but I want to just talk about, what does this mean? You go to your doctor and they are a doctor at a Catholic medical institution, which, by the way, 1 in 6 healthcare facilities now are religious healthcare facilities. Is that right?
No, it's 1 in 6 beds.
Whoa. Okay.
Are Catholic, and 1 in 5 are religious, because Baptists and Presbyterians, and they own healthcare systems also. But if you take a step back from that, one of my readers who lives in Texas yesterday said every hospital south of I-10, which is 800 miles across southern Texas and encompasses Houston and San Antonio and El Paso, every hospital south of there is a Catholic hospital. But even if it's not a religious hospital in the United States anymore, you still have hospitals applying these principles to populations. When I lived in South Carolina, the Medical University of South Carolina was my medical care facility. It's what came with my husband's job and our insurance. And so that is South Carolina's teaching hospital. It's funded by the state. The state legislature are a bunch of white Christian nationalists, and so is Governor Foghorn Leghorn. So that's what we call Henry McMaster there. So, they passed all kinds of rules that tied funding for the medical university to white Christian nationalist principles that are in this document. And the medical university caved and gave into that. So if you live in a red state with a teaching hospital now, it's highly likely that it's more than 1 in 5 beds that are being religiously influenced, because it isn't just religious institutions that are doing that anymore. It's also red state legislatures and increasingly our federal government in the form of the DOJ and the Office of Management and Budget, which we're going to talk about later in the broadcast. So 1 in 5 may sound like a lot to some people, but it's probably more than that when we drill down.
Right. And that on a sort of, treatment level, what does this mean? I mean, let's say you go in for a hysterectomy. How are you treated differently under a biblical medical ethics system?
Well, let's take a blue state, because you live in a blue state. And a lot, I won't say which one, you can if you want to, but a lot of people who come to this show live in blue states, and they think, well, this isn't something I have to worry about because I live in a blue state, so I'm just going to scroll on by. But Catholic hospitals and other religious facilities own hospitals and medical systems in blue states. So you have examples that have been reported by ProPublica and other outlets of women going to medical facilities in California and New York and Massachusetts and Illinois and places like that, and being turned away when they're miscarrying because those hospital systems won't provide care that violates their biblical medical ethics. Regardless of whether the care is legal in the state or not, they won't provide it. And so you have women going septic and going to multiple hospitals because it's not always obvious that these facilities have these affiliations anymore. And so this impacts every American wherever you are, because any facility in any state could have these affiliations. And increasingly, red states, almost every healthcare facility you go to is going to have them now.
And this, you have listed this, and this is from their own guideline, the 6 inflexible, uncompromising certainties, the authority of the word of God over the practice of medicine, which should terrify you. That should absolutely terrify you. It should make the hairs on your arm stand up, because the authority of the word of God over the practice of medicine, what does that even mean? And it's ostensibly what it means is they get to decide who gets what treatment.
Exactly.
Right. And you can get treated if you abide by or believe in their beliefs. The biblical principles upon which medicine must rest. It means treatment of illness in accordance with Scripture, which is bonkers. It is bonkers. And this
but
one,
again, I want to say, lots of white Christian nationalist politicians and people in this regime believe these things.
yes,
The people who wrote Project 2025 believe these things. Russ Vogt believes these things. So as bonkers as it sounds, please don't think this can't happen, because there are plenty of people in power who believe these things.
yeah, and I want to sort of linger a little bit on this idea of challenge the autonomy of man and the sufficiency of reason, and also to some degree deestablish the mechanistic view of man and the biblical medicine as secondary agency. But what does that mean, deestablish the mechanistic view of man, and also what the autonomy of man? What are we talking about here? Because it kind of goes back to the Garden of Eden yet again, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to go to yesterday's and read you exactly what they say in their manifesto. Man believes that he is the master of his own fate and is able to, quote unquote, improve his physical and mental abilities through drugs, artificial reproduction, and genetic engineering. So it is the secular view of man. It is the Enlightenment. It is medical advances that have led to people not dying of things we used to die of, that they're attacking, because in their view, the Bible contains everything God intended for human beings to know about everything. So vaccines aren't in the Bible, Sam. Surgeries aren't in the Bible, Sam. You know, if people went to a doctor type in the Bible, they were going to their priest. And they go into great detail in this manifesto about how the medical profession is a form of priesting. It's being a priest. It's, it has a religious connotation before anything else. And so that's what they're attacking. They're attacking our rights to our own minds and our own bodies and making decisions about those things from any other perspective than their perspective as white Christian nationalists.
And this this quote from I pulled this from your Substack, but you pulled it from somewhere else. Healthcare should only exist to teach a lost world about the one true God. What? Like, that's why healthcare should exist? It seems it means ultimately that science has no place. And I think that this is kind of a point that I wanted to get to, was that this isn't just about medicine, right? It's about all science and inquiry and all of the things. And if you believe that the sort of singular source of fact is the Bible, then everything else can kind of kick rocks, right? Then you base all human knowledge, you look at it through the lens of biblical scholarship, not even scholarship, just whatever biblical thing you want to take in. Let me ask you, why? Like, why turn your back on science in this way? And I know this is like, we always say, oh, the Christians turn their back on science, or these people turn their back on science, and all this, but like, I still, it doesn't resonate with me. Why would you rather ignore scientific evidence or fact in favor of something that is, a really great book to read in a humanities class, but otherwise totally irrelevant? What is it that they're afraid of? Getting cured?
I think, in my church, and I can speak to my specific upbringing and indoctrination, but this is pretty common across white Christian nationalism. We were always discouraged from listening to anyone or seeking much advanced education of any kind. But
Right.
Scientists in particular, academic scientists and researchers especially, were subject to more scrutiny even than that, because, these people first and foremost believe that we evolved from monkeys, Sam.
Oh, God.
And so how can anybody who believes that we are not created in the divine image of God, as they talk about in this text as well, how can we listen to people and follow people's advice about our bodies and our health care and what we're supposed to do to be whole when they're teaching us that we evolved from an animal? And so that was the locus. Evolution was the locus for all scientific skepticism that existed in my white Christian nationalist church. So once you couldn't listen to any of them because they started from a place of evolution is a thing that has been going on for millions of years, and they don't believe that either. They believe that the earth existed for 8,000 to 10,000 years, and God created it all in 6 literal 24-hour days 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. So, they believe that Noah's Ark and the flood is a real story. They believe the Garden of Eden was a real place. And if there are people here who believe those things, I'm not making fun of you.
Right.
You have every right to believe that. You have every right to seek comfort and peace and instruction and whatever you want to from that. But to force all of us to have our health care decisions be dictated by anyone's religious beliefs is wrong. And so, and that is what we had to do in white Christian nationalism when I was growing up. It was really more important that we pray when we got sick, that if we got something seriously wrong with us, we were supposed to examine ourselves spiritually to determine what we had done to upset God to give us this ailment, because first and foremost, the assumption was that we had some hidden sin in our lives that God was punishing us for. And so imagine what being in those churches can be like when that's the idea that people have. You get something wrong with you, and rather than people being empathetic and trying to be helpful, they're going, well, we need to get down and pray and figure out what you've done to make God mad. What are you doing that you're not telling us about? What do we need to deal with in your life? And what do you need to confess? So, because you're sick. So that's very much how this mentality goes. And that's what they're calling for. Like, you go to your doctor and the doctor says you have cancer. And so the first thing we need to do is figure out how you've sinned to cause God to give you this cancer so that we can fix that. Because throwing money and treatment at fixing this consequence of your sinful choices is not productive. It's wasteful. It's fraud. It's where we get those, So that is what they're advocating for in this document, and what the Heritage Foundation has been advocating for in Project 2025 and Saving America by Saving the Family, without saying so.
Absolutely. And I think that, look, this is where, we've all been kind of befuddled about the horseshoe of left-wing MAGA sort of looping around to this right-wing white Christian nationalist ideology. And RFK Jr. is a very perfect example of this. And I think, he's off eating his steak and sauerkraut, and which is so dumb. But in his speech and in his language and in his actions, he's also saying that, your personal health is either a moral success or a moral failure. Mm-hmm. Right. And to some degree, sure, we make particular choices that are unhealthy or that are healthy. But he's gone further and said things like measles. We shouldn't fear disease if we're healthy and we eat plenty of sauerkraut and, and beef. But to that end, we have seen measles cases skyrocket over the past couple of years since he's had his tenure. And this is it's not something to celebrate, right? This isn't what we want to see. You want to eliminate disease. You don't want to have to thrive in disease because you think you're healthy. But it's a very similar argument, isn't it? That you personally, this is your failure. And so you can't have, we don't want to give you, antidepressants because you're just not going outside enough. Right.
Or you're not mentally tough enough. You're not sucking it up enough. Yeah.
We don't want to give you hormone replacement therapy if you're a woman, asterisk, because you're just, you need to suffer through this. Like, this is because, our Christian friends would say, our white Christian nationalist friends would say, because Eve fucked up so bad, 8,000 years ago. Now you need to suffer.
It's a woman's calling to suffer, and menopause symptoms are part of that suffering. It's God's design. You should not interfere with God's design. Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about that and maybe transition into that, because folks like Todd Blanche, we've talked about how he's hiding the Epstein files, how he's corrupt in so many different ways, but we're not talking enough about his views on abortion and on literally biblical medical ethics. What have you found about our dear colleague, Todd Blanche?
Well, several months ago, Nina Burley, who's an investigative journalist, she's been on with Susan, I believe, here at Lincoln Square, did a deep dive into Todd Blanche's background and messaged me late one night and said, did you know that Todd Blanche's dad was a reverend, like a charismatic reverend, and he had this church in his basement in Colorado when Blanche was a kid? And I was like, no, I don't know anything about that. I mean, that it's a different branch of white Christian nationalism than what I grew up in, even though I'm only, I think, 4 years older than he is. Maybe not even, maybe only 2 or 3 years older than he is. So we came up in it around the same time frames. So, he doesn't talk a lot about his religious background or his Christianity that I can find. But I would wager that he is a white Christian nationalist, because his dad was this charismatic white Christian nationalist reverend who had a church in Colorado. He went to jail at one point for operating it without a permit and refusing to stop or whatever. Ultimately, they moved to New Mexico, and Todd Blanche went to a rigid military school. Owen Wilson also graduated from there. Sam Donaldson, the news anchor at ABC, graduated from there. So he went to that school near Roswell, New Mexico. But his upbringing was very steeped in white Christian nationalism. And he's made no overt statements like someone like me to reject that. As far as I can tell, he's not done any deconstruction. He's not condemned any of that upbringing or indoctrination. So my read on him is he is absolutely 100% signed on to this vision of biblical medical ethics. And I would class him as an abortion abolitionist.
Yes.
So, which is what's really taken control of the abortion discussions now that the regime is having.
And he's said somewhat recently that, look, we've done some good work on the abortion issue, but the pro-life issue, he says, but we have a long way to go. And really that's signaling, we want to get rid of all of it. And this is also the collision of religion, biblical medical ethics, and the assertion of power from the very top. Because it's not just about their beliefs, it's about coercion and control. It's about their beliefs. And you say this so eloquently all the time: believe whatever you want. All
if you don't want to have an abortion, don't have an abortion.
Right.
I'm not going to force you to have an abortion. That's ridiculous. But that the flip side is also true. You don't have any right to tell me not to have an abortion.
No. But I think it even goes further than that, in that what I find so interesting about this particular topic in medical ethics, biblical medical ethics, is that for years I was like, we know abstinence-only approaches to sex ed in schools are fundamentally broken. Like, it doesn't work at all, right? It doesn't stop. And if you have more teen pregnancies, and if you have more unwanted pregnancies because people are ignorant about birth control or about the actual facts on the ground, then you will have more abortions, right? So if you really want to solve the problem, then maybe we need less poverty, and we need more actual education, and we need more access to birth control, and we need all of those things. But all of those things represent a moral failing, right?
Right.
You have to just bare knuckle it, right? You have to white knuckle this thing. Like, you're a 16-year-old and you have a lot of hormones, but you got to fight through it because of God and all this other stuff.
Well, I wasn't taught sex ed in my white Christian nationalist Christian school, because teaching teenagers about how your bodies work just makes you curious and makes you want to have sex.
Right.
So you should be completely, utterly ignorant about every bit of it. And that way you won't be curious. Never mind that it's a natural urge and an impulse. And when you're 14 or 15, boys probably think about it 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day, every day. That's
perhaps
how they're hardwired. So, and then to have that happening to you and you don't understand what's happening to you. To just have I didn't know what my period was. And we've talked about this before. I didn't understand that it was tied to getting pregnant or my reproductive system. It was just something that God caused, and I might have pain with it because Eve sinned and ate the fruit first. And, I just needed to wear this pad and do these things. And, but there was no I didn't understand that ovulation. I didn't understand. I mean, none of it. And that's still like, I have family in another southern state, and one of them was in college. And thankfully, she had a parent who was a healthcare worker who made sure she understood how her body works and had what she needed. Not a single friend of hers in that southern state at that southern college knew how their bodies worked, understood how they got pregnant, had any birth control at all, and they were having sex all the time.
Oh my God.
And so, and that is standard in many places around the United States, that young people just don't understand how their bodies work at all. And that is by design. They this concept of biblical medical ethics is, you just teach people that having sex outside of one man married to one unrelated woman marriage for the purpose of procreating is sin, and you just don't do that. And when they come to the doctor and ask for birth control and they say they're not married, you just say, well, you can't do that because that's sin, and I'm not prescribing those medications for you because you should not be having sex because you're not married. Period. End of discussion. Go home. Deal with your sin problem. And that's actually what they want doctors to be saying to patients. Just go home and deal with your sin problem.
Absolutely. I'm really curious, and I I want to get into some solutions in a sec. We're running a little low on time, but the GLP-1 situation is so fascinating to me in this particular context, because the mechanisms are that make it effective. It's almost as if it goes in and shuts down your sin, right? It's like it basically just takes the cravings away. It's you just and in that case, you're sort of, it would seem to me at least, that it proves that none of this shit is a moral function. It has nothing to do with God or the Bible. There's a chemistry and a biology that's happening here, and you can like dial it down, right? And if for example, reproductive health or addiction, right? If any of those issues were less viewed through the prism of morality and more through biology, we could solve the problem.
Right.
We could actually solve that problem. So we and to a Christian, I'm wondering, or to a white Christian nationalist, is solving that problem through drugs still solving the problem?
No, they don't believe.
Which is bananas.
They don't.
You don't want to end crime. You don't want to end abortion. You don't want to end teen pregnancy. You don't want to do this unless somebody can just suffer through it. That's the whole point.
Yes, suffering through it brings us closer to God.
God.
Suffering brings us closer to white Christian nationalist, angry, vengeful, smitey Old Testament God. That's what they want.
That's crazy.
So it's crazy, but also, let's say it again, lots of people in positions of power, in political power at the federal, state, and local level in the United States and in this regime believe these things. They're not saying them out front. This is what they say amongst themselves. What we're going through today is how they talk about this amongst themselves. They would never get up in front of a group of you and me and say this because it's crazy. But they say it amongst themselves, and they're shaping healthcare policy to be a world where they get to decide who has healthcare and what kind, and that's what they're doing, and they're using their religious beliefs to do that. So rather than sitting back and saying that Andra Watkins is a ridiculous, crazy, hysterical harpy, and there aren't that many people who believe this, over 100 million Americans, according to PRRI from February of this year, subscribe to white Christian nationalism. 1/3 of Americans are either fully in this cult or very closely adjacent to it. So I promise you, there are plenty of Americans, even if you don't know any of them, who subscribe to this kind of belief system about healthcare. as crazy as it sounds.
And one, sort of last point about this is I just read some reporting that, what do they call the hive cameras have been used to track man moving from one state to another where marijuana dispensaries were legal and tracked back, and they used the footage.
The flock cameras, yeah.
Yeah, the flock, that's it. Hive would be more prescient, but anyway, and they used the footage as probable cause to pull him over and search his car. That's marijuana, but it could be anything. It could be abortion. It could be reproductive services
for abortion care as well. They have used those to try to track women to abortion providers in blue states as well.
So I guess the point is it's here, it's happening, and now you know about it. And what do we do?
First of all, it's really important that you don't look at this and say, that's too crazy to ever happen, because it is happening. And putting your head in the sand and saying that's insane and crazy and batshit and it won't ever happen. We have to stop doing that and realize that it is happening. As scary and hard and heavy as that is, we have to. And then the second thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that every person who can vote in the midterms is registered and votes in the midterms for candidates who are not like this. Because even at the local level, and earlier in the show, we talked about my own state-funded teaching hospital. Even in those situations, electing people who subscribe to this kind of worldview is killing us. And it's going to continue to kill us. And that is not hyperbole. That is not me being hysterical. So we have to make sure that every person on the ballot at every level is someone who will not subscribe to a biblical, medical, ethic, white Christian nationalist world. That's the second thing we can do. The third thing we can do is start talking about this specifically in our indivisible groups, in our other community type groups. Start bringing something like this out to some of your colleagues and connections and say, what do you think about this? And then, let them look at it and talk about it and then say, did you realize that this politician and this politician and believe this stuff? And start helping more Americans understand how truly surrounded we are by people who subscribe to this worldview that is killing us every day. And so those are things that we can all do. It's work that's hard. We've been schooled to not talk about politics and religion, and we're talking about both of them when we bring this up. But we have to do it. We have to talk about these things more and help more Americans understand how dangerous and deadly not stopping this is going to be.
Well, that's a common refrain on this show, and it's why we do the show. It's why I love this show, because, guys, all of this stuff is linked to all of the other things, and this is the real sort of fleshy part of the entire movement that is behind MAGA and Donald Trump. And Trump may seem like a false idol, and for sure he is, but the people he surrounded himself with and who've found themselves in his orbit are pushing this kind of control. We always talk about, what happens when Trumpism dies? They're there. Mm-hmm. They're filling the vacuum. It's already happening. Mm-hmm. So vote. Make sure your neighbors and your friends are registered and that they know what's actually happening. Share videos like this, share content like this. We always post clips. That's an easy way to share stuff to make people more aware. Even more than that, for such a time as this, Andra posts receipts. So it's not just, your friend can be like, well, you're a hysterical harpy. Loudmouth harpy. I can't remember your whole thing. But you can say, well, actually, I didn't just do my own research. These are the foundational documents that the white Christian nationalists are actually producing. So don't take our word for it. Take their word for it. They're telling you what they're going to do.
In the lead up to the midterms, I am going back to some of the things that I wrote that I said they would do in 2024 and showing people how they've done those things. And I'm making my archives free up until the midterms.
Amazing.
So, you know, all of these receipts are there. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go back and look at the receipts and see how I've connected all these dots. And you don't have to do it for any money. The archives are all going to be open.
That's an incredible resource, Andra. You're a real gift. Thank you all for tuning in today, and we'd love to hear your comments in the post after this. So leave them. We go through everything. We love hearing from y'all. There I go again, y'all. You're really rubbing off on me, Andra. Like now I know how to spot white Christian nationalists, and I'm saying y'all. It's a double whammy. Well, see y'all next week.